This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
Hey, it's Mark Maron from WTF here to let you know that this podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. And I'm sure the reason you're listening to this podcast right now is because you chose it. Well, choose Progressive's Name Your Price tool, and you could find insurance options that fit your budget, so you can pick the best one for your situation. Who doesn't like choice? Try it at Progressive.com. And now, some legal info. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
When it comes to weight loss, no two people are the same. That's why Noom builds personalized plans based on your unique psychology and biology. Take Brittany. After years of unsustainable diets, Noom helped her lose 20 pounds and keep it off.
I was definitely in a yo-yo cycle for years of just losing weight, gaining weight, and it was exhausting.
And Stephanie. She's a former D1 athlete who knew she couldn't outtrain her diet, and she lost 38 pounds.
My relationship to food before Noom was never consistent.
And Evan, he can't stand salads, but he still lost 50 pounds with Noom.
I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. Even through the pickiness, Noom taught me that building better habits builds a healthier lifestyle. I'm not doing this to get to a number. I'm doing this to feel better.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom users compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
The holiday season is now approaching, but at BlueNile.com, there's always something to celebrate. Whether you're looking for everyday elegance to elevate a casual outfit or a statement piece worthy of your biggest holiday looks, Blue Nile brings sparkle to any occasion. With some of the highest quality standards in the industry and jewelry experts on hand to answer any questions, you can be confident in your purchase. Right now, celebrate the season with 30% off at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com.
Talk to another writer.
Who?
Oh, Jesus. You throw a rock in here, you'll hit one. Do me a favor, Fink. Throw it hard.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema.
Hi everybody, my name's John Bleasdale. I'm a critic and writer on film, and today I'm going to be talking about 1980s comedy with Nick de Semlyen. Nick is a features editor at Empire magazine, and his work has appeared all over the place, Rolling Stone and Stuff and Time Out as well. But he's also the writer of a book which I'm really excited to talk about. Wild and Crazy Guys, How the Comedy Mavericks of the 80s Changed Hollywood Forever. There's no getting around it. The comedies of the 80s were some of the best films Hollywood produced in that weird decade. The likes of John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, Rick Moranis, John Candy, Chevy Chase, Steve Martin, Bill Murray, and Eddie Murphy, to name but, well, all of them. If you enjoy the episode, please like and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Jonty, DRJONTY. But before you do any of that, please enjoy the conversation. Roger Lewis, when he wrote the Peter Sellers biography, in the introduction, he had this thing where he said all of his friends who he said, I'm doing the biography of Peter Sellers, went, oh, wow, what a brilliant job. It's going to be so much fun. You're watching all those Peter Sellers movies. You know, what a dream job. And he sort of says, I can't tell you how depressing it has been because, you know, partly because of who Peter Sellers is, but also even watching the film sort of had an accumulative effect of sort of trying to analyze comedy, knowing what he knew about Peter Sellers. And I was wondering, when you were sort of researching the film and you were going back to these films and watching them again, was that just like, oh, I'm a kid in a sweet shop, or was there ever a point where it's like, oh man, this is a bit of a struggle?
Oh, well, I think there's definitely a point when you're covering like 15 years of cinema with like 8 main characters. There's going to be a point where you feel burned out a little bit. Like that's kind of why I was watching things as I went. So I didn't sit down and watch everything and then start writing. Like I don't think I could have handled that because, I started off by watching the first 5 years of Saturday Night Live. And so just that is a massive marathon of stuff, lots of which is quite mediocre or bad. So, you're already off to quite a challenging start, but that's why I kind of meted it out. And with these guys, a lot of them go off the boil as their careers kind of wound on. So watching, the first couple of films by Chevy Chase or, Eddie Murphy, they're great. They're classics. And then as they go on in time, generally the films sort of get worse. I mean, there are people like Dan Aykroyd where he was kind of pinballing between a classic and a disaster and then back to a classic, and in a really interesting way that you just never knew what the hell was going to come of it. But yeah, when you're covering that much, it's a lot to watch. So there's inevitably going to be patches where you are questioning your life choices. I think halfway through Modern Problems, I was probably having a midlife crisis myself.
Talking about Saturday Night Live, do you still watch Saturday Night Live?
I don't really.
I was just wondering how it compared the sort of the so-called heyday and today, because I know it sort of goes in waves.
Yeah, I'm kind of the opinion that it was never that golden age of Saturday Night Live that people have in their heads was never there. Like I kind of feel like that was a phantom thing. And having sat down and watched episode after episode of those early years, there's some great stuff in it. There were amazing sketches, but even back then there was absolute dross. Even with all of those guys at the peak of their powers, the idea of there was like an hour of amazing TV that just never existed. Right. So I think it's always been kind of, a lot of patchy stuff with some diamonds in there. I kind of keep track of what's going on. Like I know about the Elon Musk stuff that's happening, and I'll watch the monologues I want to watch. I'll watch on YouTube. It's really accessible now, which is great. There's a great app on the iPad where you can kind of punch in the performers, and you can type in Bill Murray and Eddie Murphy, and it will pull up the two sketches they did together, which is really cool. But yeah, I don't think that halcyon age of Saturday Night Live really existed in the way that people think it did.
I mean, when you started getting the Saturday Night Live group leaking into cinema, who were the pioneers there?
It's a good question.
Or was it more the National Lampoon gang? And then, there was quite a lot of crossover, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was. The kind of the starting point for it all was Animal House, which was the National Lampoon guys writing a movie, and then Belushi ending up on it, and John Landis getting involved. And so there was this interesting kind of cross-pollination of things, which then went on, and all the interesting little collaborations you get along the way. Belushi was amazing in that film. He wasn't particularly a creative force behind it, and Blues Brothers was much more his creation and Aykroyd's creation. There were people like Eddie Murphy who ended up in the right film at the right time, but then there were people like Dan Aykroyd and Steve Martin who were actually writing their own stuff. And yeah, they were much more the kind of the pioneering forces, I think, because they were envisioning the characters, building a vehicle around them. And so they were kind of driving it. Whereas I think Eddie Murphy was much more, he was good at picking stuff in the early days, but he wasn't really creating the stuff himself.
What sort of attracted you to looking at this period and these films? Was it from your own sort of viewing habits when you were growing up?
Yeah, definitely nostalgia. These were the movies, not all of them. Modern Problems I did not watch as a child, but Ghostbusters was massive for me. I was not allowed to watch Ghostbusters on my 6th birthday, and I'm still furious about it.
You were supposed to go to the cinema to see it, and
no, I was 4 when it came out, so I missed that. I did not see Ghostbusters on the big screen. I have seen it on the big screen now. In fact, I've seen Secret Cinema Ghostbusters, which was pretty fun. But no, I wanted to watch it on VHS, and I was not allowed because it had ghosts in it.
For that reason. Yeah, it is kind of creepy. I'm going to make you very jealous now. When I saw it, and I brought this up in a previous episode as well, so this is going to be a well-worn story by the time we finish. I saw it in Barrow-in-Furness in the then Astra Cinema, and it was packed, absolutely packed on a Friday night, and they were dancing in the aisles during the theme song, so much so that they stopped the film, and the manager came out and said, look, if you're not gonna sit down in your seats, we're gonna show you making cheese in Belgium. Or something, some sort of terrible B, because this was still the time of the B movies, so they would put these little submarine building in Vickers, and off you go. So it was as close to the sort of rock around, what was the Bill Haley Rock Around the Clock?
Yeah.
That sort of juvenile delinquency in the cinema.
I've heard the legends of people singing along to the Ghostbusters song. I've not witnessed that happen, but I'd like to imagine the cinema manager at the place you're at being forced to dress like Stay Puft Man, just to kind of. I would have loved to have seen Ghostbusters when it came out, and Beverly Hills Cop as well. I mean, both coming out the same year, and apparently Beverly Hills Cop, people were screaming and the full hysteria. That would have been an amazing thing to experience. I didn't really experience any of these films in the cinema. Groundhog Day I did, but not really any of the 80s ones. But no, I mean, it's a massive nostalgia thing for me. But then also, working for Empire, I kind of got to meet a lot of these guys and interview them. And so, as that kind of went along, I got more and more interested in the making of these films. And the making of these films seemed quite dramatic for some reason, probably due to their personalities. But, the story of how Blues Brothers got made is kind of as interesting as the film, and as kind of involves as much insanity as the film itself. So yeah, I was just kind of drawn to this genre, and it seemed like quite a chaotic, kind of turbulent sort of time in Hollywood with these people.
They're literally wild and crazy guys.
Yeah, I hope it lives up to the title. Yeah, when you're calling a book that, you have to, provide a certain amount of wildness and craziness. But I think it just about comes off. I mean, there's quite a lot of debauchery in there.
Absolutely. I mean, Animal House sort of feels like not only the sort of spur for the actual comedy that goes on and much imitated. I mean, there's so many. Even in the book, you have like Stripes and Meatballs and Caddyshack, and they all feel like it's Animal House on a golf course. It's Animal House in the army, like as a template. But it also feels like something of a template for just the way they're living, and it's almost an ethos.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Belushi and Bluto are not dissimilar in their lifestyles. And yeah, it was a weird thing where these stars are almost being encouraged, when they're getting paid this much money to play crazy anti-authoritarian, that's a hard word to say, people, that's going to leak into how they actually behave. And so that's another interesting element, is on the one hand they're kind of these chaotic forces, on the other hand they're working in Hollywood, where you have to follow a script, and you have to stay on schedule, and there's a lot of money involved, and you've got authority figures on every single set trying to keep you under control. And so you've got some quite interesting stories of them butting heads with people.
Who do you think was the most sort of difficult to deal with in that way? I mean, there's a bit in the book, I think, there's obviously the Belushi story, which is tragic in the way it ends. But even someone like Chevy Chase seems to be a really, who looks more the straight guy. But he does some stuff.
He does some stuff, much of it cocaine fueled. I think he was challenging to try and control. I think Bill Murray, definitely very hard to, but even Eddie Murphy, who would have meetings at Paramount, and people would be trying desperately to like get him to sign up to stuff, and he would just sit there with his entourage. I think one of the people who was trying to get him to read scripts would call it my eyes glaze over, because he would just sit there and lose interest within like half a sentence of the pitch. But you've got these guys who are just so powerful in a way that comedy stars aren't anymore. Like, there's no one with the clout. There's no comedy star in Hollywood that is like Eddie Murphy in terms of just the sheer like power and swagger, and how do you try and control someone like that who's making so much money and does what he wants? But there are a couple in the book that don't behave like that. Maybe 3 people, maybe Steve Martin, Rick Moranis, John Candy, I think are the nice guys who probably you could have a civilized conversation with and would sit and listen to you. But probably over half of them were kind of human tornadoes you were trying to control.
Yeah, look great on stage, but you don't want to take home to mother.
Probably not. No, probably not. Yeah, I think that's probably accurate.
How about, like when I was thinking about them as well in terms of, say, Robin Williams and the sort of trajectories of stars that sort of blossomed in the late 80s, early 90s, and a little bit after the guys you're talking about, although Williams is a sort of contemporary. They do like, there seems to be a tendency for those, even someone like Jim Carrey, to move away from comedy at a certain point and do more dramatic roles. These guys, they sort of try to do that as well, don't they? I mean, Bill Murray tries, and it doesn't quite work out.
Yeah, there is something about community. It's interesting you mentioned Robin Williams, because he was almost moving into drama from the beginning. Like if you look at I've had a few people say, why didn't you cover Robin Williams? Obviously, he wasn't really moving with this group, and he wasn't really performing with them and starring in films. But also, if you look at his filmography, like Robin Williams, right from the start, doing The World According to Garp, and he doesn't actually do that much comedy in the 80s. He gets much more into comedy in his second decade. But with the others, you're right, like they're all these comedy guys are trying to move into drama. And it's interesting because it goes the other way around with action stars. If you look at like the action stars of the 80s, they're all trying to move into comedy desperately, and the comedians are moving the other way. So there's this interesting thing, like whatever someone is kind of like pegged to, they're trying to get away from it.
It's always the grass.
There aren't many people who just want to, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that because of the action stars, of course, Schwarzenegger doing Junior and all those comedies, Sylvester Stallone, Stop or My Mum Will Shoot.
My Mum Will Shoot.
But even Bruce Willis, I remember Bruce Willis being in Die Hard and thinking, what's the guy from Moonlighting doing in Die Hard? I mean, I thought it was, yeah, I mean, look, bless my prophetic soul. I thought, wow, he's making a fool of himself trying to be this action hero.
Yeah. I think a lot of people thought that, they took his face off the poster 2 weeks before the film came out. And
really?
Yeah, the original poster was Bruce Willis's face big with a little Nakatomi Plaza next to him. And it tested the worst of any poster that Fox were doing. And so they did another poster that was a giant building with a tiny Bruce Willis. And that was the poster that went out. And then, after the film came out, they then put the original poster out because it turned out it worked. But that's how kind of people, and then obviously Bruce Willis did comedy, got out of comedy, and then went back to or tried to get back to comedy with like Hudson Hawk and things, which didn't work. So yeah, it's always interesting watching people try and flip from one thing to another.
Yeah, that's such a funny story. That I feel validated to some degree, and yet immediately invalidated by the fact that I was making the same mistake as everybody else, I suppose. You were saying earlier that there's this sort of trajectory that these comedy stars seem to go on, where they have this sort of relatively brief sort of burst of absolute, the stars align. I mean, do you think that's something specific as well to comedy? Because it doesn't seem to. Anthony Hopkins, you can go back to Magic and then forward to The Father, and he's pretty much always there. But with someone like Will Ferrell, you're sort or Chevy Chase, or Eddie Murphy, you're kind of going 1, 2, 3, and you're done. And that's you've had your 4 or 5 years of real peak Hollywood bankability, and then the projects get worse, and there's occasional renaissances and bowfingers and late blips, but you got to wait for the donkey to come along in Shrek.
It's weird, isn't it? Like the bigger a star gets, the more they get kind of stuck in doing one particular thing. Whereas Anthony Hopkins is obviously massive, but he's not Eddie Murphy, so he can experiment with his persona. Not that but he can play a serial killer, then he can play a butler a few years later and people will accept it. Whereas I think you look at Eddie Murphy and when he tried to do something really experimental, generally people weren't interested. Not that I don't think he particularly was experimental, but Steve Martin, for instance, he did The Jerk and everyone kind of knew him for doing that kind of shtick on stage. And then when he tried to do like a musical, or he tried to do this, or tried to do the film noir thing, like nobody knew what to do with it. They were like, can you go back and do The Jerk again, which he didn't want to do. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, what I liked about these guys and what makes writing about them interesting generally is that they were trying to experiment all the time. They weren't just doing the same thing, or at least they weren't for like 10, 15 years. And then I think after that, they all just basically, started doing the same thing. But there was so much experimentation. It was almost like they were trying to reinvent themselves every time out.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely feels like in this period. And the sort of, I hesitate to use the word sort of like intellectual, or the sort of mad genius that emerges from the book, I feel is Dan Aykroyd, because he's the one sort of behind the scenes and in front of the cameras, sort of writing huge scripts. Didn't he write a massive script for Ghostbusters, 4 hours long? It would have been 400 pages or something.
Yeah, his original Ghostbusters was deranged. That was the one that had people driving around in a refrigerator repair truck, and they were going to other planets. And I mean, I would love to read that draft. I don't know, even Ivan Reitman doesn't seem to have a copy of it. I imagine Aykroyd has one, but it's never been made public, that original Ghostbuster script, I don't think.
Has it never leaked onto the internet or anything? No.
I don't. Maybe I'm wrong about this. I'll have to check. I'm going to check. But his original Blues Brothers script was like, famously so massive that they put it in a phone directory sleeve, or he put it in a phone directory sleeve, and then he lobbed it over the fence of the producer. But he, which suggests that he has a sense of humor about it, which is good. But yet he still writes this script that is so unwieldy.
He knows that it's way too long, but he just doesn't care.
It's almost worse because he knows it's way too long and makes a joke out of it, but yet he still goes, "Here you go, film this." Yeah, I would love to read that original version as well. I think they did film some of it. It's kind of there as deleted scenes, but I mean, he is just out of control. Like, his imagination is absolutely out of control. And, I kind of argue in the book that he needed someone to rein him in. So I think on Ghostbusters, he had Ivan Reitman to rein him in. And on Blues Brothers, he had John Landis to rein him in. And then when you get to Nothing But Trouble, there's no one there because he's directing it as well. And so you end up with this just like...
Nothing But Trouble is the film that you sort of pointed me towards. I hadn't heard of it. And I think you can see it. I saw it on YouTube. So presumably nobody's chasing up the copyright with any sort of sense of urgency. Can you just describe it? Because I imagine a lot of people listening might never have even heard of this film, and it's such a crazy movie, and I'm forever grateful for you to...
Yeah, what was your experience like watching it?
It starts off as one thing, and it's got the recognizable faces. You've got people like Chevy Chase and Demi Moore, a really young Demi Moore, and then it goes into something which, well, last week I watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and there's a little bit of that there. There's that slight, that unhinged feeling of who even thought of this.
Yeah, well, like Ghostbusters, it started with what Dan Aykroyd claims is reality. He obviously believes in ghosts and has many stories, and I've been privileged to speak to him and hear some of these stories, and he's so serious about it. It's not like ghosts is like a fun, silly thing for him. It's like he absolutely believed that he shared a bed with the ghost of Mama Cass, in the early 90s, and he will tell you about the 17 spectral spirits he's encountered and all this. But he claims that Nothing But Trouble started with him, when he was pulled over by he was driving through a creepy wood when he was doing Saturday Night Live, and a justice of the peace, some kind of sort of creepy judge, took him to the house, and he thought he was going to be dropped through the floor, and he was genuinely scared for his life. It was like 2 a.m, and so he kind of imagined, but in a way that he describes it like he genuinely thinks that it probably was the case, that there were creepy goblins and stuff under the floorboards. So he turned that into a film and sort of roped in all of his sort of old Saturday Night Live buddies and John Candy and Chevy Chase and made this film that, yeah, like you're absolutely right. It's Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but a comedy and a slightly lower body count. It's got a roller coaster called Mr. Bone Stripper that will take your flesh off, and it's got these horrible things called the infant bodies that are like giant troll babies, and Dan Aykroyd played them himself while directing. It's like, I talked to a couple of people for the book. I was very happy to talk to a couple of people who were on set of Nothing But Trouble, because there isn't that much out there about it.
Right.
It's a very sort of under the scene film, but probably rightly so. They were describing just very strange images of Dan Aykroyd directing people while dressed in this grotesque latex sort of monster makeup. The way he filmed it as well was like he gave everyone their own monitor, so all of the actors were giving notes on every take, and it was just carnage by all accounts.
It looks like it's quite. I don't want to say high budget or anything, but it doesn't look particularly cheap.
It wasn't cheap. It was, the studio believed in it. And it was the guy who created Ghostbusters doing a film about the supernatural again with Chevy Chase, bringing all these comedy guys together. So, it wasn't complete insanity. And I think, at the beginning of Ghostbusters, I imagine all the studio people were thinking, like this is going to be a disaster. So you just never know. Like, that's one thing I've learned from writing about these films, is that everyone thinks the successes are going to be flops, and no one knows what's going to be a smash. So it might, in another world, it might have been amazing. But they were throwing money at it, and one of the fun details I learned from speaking to someone who was there. I spoke to like John Candy's business partner who was on set a lot, and he said that Bruce Willis came to set one day to sort of be there to see Demi, and just the image of Bruce Willis watching this stuff going on, I kind of love that. I don't know what he made of it.
It's probably, is this before or after Die Hard?
It's after it was a couple of years after Die Hard, I think.
Right.
So it was around the time of Die Hard 2. But Tupac was on set as well. Tupac is in this film.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of finished the book on that and Groundhog Day back to back because I just thought you can't have more of a disaster and a triumph happening at the same time. Like, it's just fascinating that those movies are kind of happening across town around the same time as each other.
Yeah, it's kind of an ironic reversal as well, because Dan Aykroyd's the guy who's made these, huge hits, and Bill Murray's sort of gone off to France for a while and had more of a bumpy ride, and then he gets the payday in the end.
Yeah, and they thought Groundhog Day was going to be a disaster. Everyone involved in the making of that, apart from Bill Murray and probably Harold Ramis and a couple of other people, like the studio were freaking out. They didn't know what this thing was. It's a comedy where you got a guy killing himself or trying to kill himself. I mean, that was an insane film as well. And now, like, looking back, it's obvious that, Groundhog Day was always going to be amazing. But at the time, they didn't know what was going on with that film. The film changed a lot. There was a gypsy curse element at one point that they got rid of, but essentially, Bill Murray came on and just rewrote the script himself without telling anyone. He didn't tell the director or the studio, but he reworked the script on his own and just turned up with it just before they were about to start filming, and just threw everything into disarray. And, they had two different versions of the script on set, which I've never head of that. A star and a director, they've got two different versions of the film they're trying to make, and they're winging it. They were, adding scenes on the day and rewriting scenes with the actors on set. And so it's fascinating. I mean, I just think, especially with comedy, you can't quantify it. You can't, even if all the ingredients are good. Why is Ghostbusters considered a classic and Ghostbusters 2 is largely derided? It's got exactly the same people in it. You just don't know. It's
that's so funny because I've only ever seen Ghostbusters 2 once, and I think it was at the cinema. I don't think I've ever seen it again. And we've got the DVD downstairs in a 2-pack with Ghostbusters, but it's just never occurred to me to watch it again.
So there weren't people sing along at that screening when you saw that?
No.
It wasn't like mass hysteria. I really like Ghostbusters too. I'm much mocked in the Empire office, or the Empire Virtual Office as it is these days, for my Ghostbusters 2 championing. Like, I genuinely, look, I've said it, but I probably don't stand by it. I have said before that it's better than the first one. I don't think that's necessarily true, but I do think there are elements of it that are better than the first one.
I'll just edit out that last bit and just leave you saying
I stand by it. Vigo is a better villain than Zool. I stand by that.
Oh yeah, no, I can. That's the only element I remember. Vigo the Carpathian. So the fact that I can remember it after one viewing shows something.
The courtroom scene is great. Anyway, that's a different podcast. Me championing or attempting to champion Ghostbusters 2.
Even a podcast series.
It could be. You'd expand that into a series.
Every element.
But I just find it fascinating with comedy, especially. I mean, action. You kind of you put a great action star, charismatic action star into a good kind of formula plot, and you have enough explosions, enough gunfire, and people are going to watch it and enjoy it. But with comedy, look at Steve Martin. He has a massive hit, everyone loves him, then he does something else and everyone hates it and it gets bad reviews, and the same people, but people are reacting so differently, and they're trying to recreate what they had once. But laughter, how do you make people laugh? And also the fact that with comedy, repeating yourself, a joke isn't funny the second time round. So it's not like action where you can do another keep doing Terminator films and they'll be hits. Like, you can't keep doing the same comedy because eventually the joke gets old.
Yeah, I would maybe push back on that Terminator.
Well, yes, all right. Well, you can do it twice and it will work.
yeah. I'll give you a sequel, definitely. That was I've lost I had a really good thing lined up then, and I've just forgotten it completely. What was it?
Probably wasn't.
Oh yeah. No, I've got it. It's because that's all staying in. That's gold. No, I was thinking about Steve Martin, and you saying because that's what gives you a sort of idea of the 80s as this golden age, because it does have these experiments and these fresh faces popping up. And then when you get Steve Martin in the sort of 90s and noughties, he seems to have just sort of given up and gone, okay, what do you want me to do? Clouseau? I'll do Clouseau. Bilko? I'll do Bilko, and it's like I'll just riff on something. I'll just play Bach. I'm not doing any improvisations anymore. I've run out of steam. Do you think that's fair, or do you think? I mean, I quite like some of those late, but cheaper by the dozen. I'll just do family-friendly fare.
Yeah, I mean, definitely they become less wild and crazy, so to speak. But there's definitely a tamed element. I think part of that is probably that they have kids themselves, and then they have grandkids, and they start making stuff. I think inevitably when people get to that age, you start softening and you start making stuff for a younger audience because you're around children a lot. And so you see that even with, the action guys, they're doing films that are PGs and comedies and kiddie films. So yeah, I definitely think, Steve Martin's stuff in the 90s is a lot less exciting than his 80s stuff. Bowfinger is great though. And there are still interesting things though,
How did you actually sleep last night? If it didn't feel like your very best rest, then you need to upgrade to the softest, most luxurious bedding from Boll & Branch. Their signature sheets are made from the finest 100% organic cotton and get softer with every wash. Millions of sleepers love their sheets, and right now, you can feel the difference for yourself during their biggest sales of the entire year. Hurry to bollandbranch.com to shop their best offers. Limited time only. Exclusions apply. See site for details.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes per detail.
Spanish Prisoner, and there are probably 5 or 6 films he made. But yeah, Sergeant Bilko, I'm not going to defend. It's indefensible.
It's not better than the original Phil Silvers version.
Definitely not better than the original Phil Silvers.
I'm
not sure I've seen Sergeant Bilko. I've seen bits of it. I'm not sure I've seen the whole thing.
What the Steve Martin film, you mean?
Steve Martin one, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, Sergeant Bilko was already remade as Boss Cat years.
Boss Cat.
Before.
Did you call it Boss Cat?
Isn't it Boss Cat or is it Top Cat?
I thought it was Top Cat. Maybe Boss Cat is like what it's called. I don't know. I'm sure it's called Top Cat in America.
I've got a feeling. I've got a feeling you're right. I think it's Top Cat, and then maybe it was. Yeah, I'm going to Google that as well. This podcast is going to be called Hot Takes and Stuff We Should Have Googled Before We Started.
Maybe Boss Cat is like what real Top Cat heads call it. Like that's in the kind of the lingo.
It's what Scousers call it. It's Boss Cat.
It's a better title. Yeah, I don't think there's anyone who's going to argue that what these guys did in the 90s is better than what they did in the 80s. Is that the case with any of them? Bill Murray is probably the exception, right?
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, Bill Murray, I think, he's doing even from Groundhog Day, I think he's just doing a totally different thing. He's sort of like it's like when he came back and his hair was white and he did Broken Flowers and Rushmore. He's a sort of like Mickey Rourke. He just looks a totally different person, even though the persona's pretty much there. But yeah, there seems to be a much bigger gap than the years that have passed.
Yeah, and he kind of just said goodbye to comedy, really. Like, I think he just went, that's it. And Groundhog Day is like that transition almost, where it's half comedy and half philosophical, existentialist drama that just happens to be trapped inside a comedy. But yeah, I think he out of all of them didn't really want to be a comedian. Almost, you get that sense that he wasn't committed to any of the stuff. Like Ghostbusters, he sort of turned up, but didn't particularly want to be there. But was brilliant in it anyway.
That's it. I mean, that's his charm, isn't it? If Belushi is manic energy and Aykroyd is the hokey, weird one, then Murray is that sort of cool indifference, which ends up stealing the show.
Yeah, he's the guy who wants to be anywhere else. He's the guy who's got his, headed to the exit. You can't hold him anywhere. He's the cool guy you want to stay at your party, but he's got somewhere else to be, so he's saying goodbye. And so there's that sense of him, which absolutely became him in real life. Is he just the guy that can't be pinned down? He'll just turn up where he wants to. You can't, and it's the same, trust me, it's the same with trying to interview him. I was very lucky.
I was going to ask, did you get invited to the party or was he out the door before you
No, I was extremely lucky. I was very, very lucky. I was in Cannes, and it was the year of Moonrise Kingdom, and there was a junket, and I was there to interview Wes Anderson and the kids from Moonrise Kingdom, but not Bill Murray, because he was doing like 2 interviews that day, or 2 interviews in the whole of Cannes, but he was basically just there for the premiere. And I found out he was doing 2 interviews by talking to some of the publicists, and I hung around I just basically camped outside for the whole day, and they would go into this little VIP area and let him know I was there every now and again. And eventually he must have gone, yeah, whatever, bring him in. And so I got this half an hour sit down with him at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon that was not scheduled. And it was great. I did like pint of milk with him for Empire, and talked about a bunch of different stuff, including the Chevy Chase fight that kind of then became the beginning of the book. So I think if that hadn't happened, I probably wouldn't have written the book in the first place.
Oh wow, that's your inciting incident.
It was the inciting incident. It was that he talked about it. I hadn't read him talk about it anywhere else. It's quite a famous incident in some circles, but I hadn't heard him talk about it. And he said some interesting stuff. And then that was it. That was in 2012 or something. And then it kind of just stuck in my head. And then a few years later, I was like, that's the beginning of a book.
Yeah,
and I'm gonna write it. So that was that kind of inspired the whole thing.
I think that was my first Cannes. I think I was there the same year. Yeah, because I remember being slightly unimpressed by Moonrise Kingdom. Not disliking it or anything, but just like it's Wes Anderson doing Wes Anderson, and there's not, I've already seen this. So
yeah, I know what you mean. I haven't rewatched it. I did like seeing Bruce Willis doing that. I thought,
Bruce Willis is turning up in this conversation much more than I had anticipated. But no, absolutely. I just want him to go back and do a Moonlighting reunion with Sybil Shepherd.
Maybe, yeah. I think the closest you'll get to that is the Bruce Willis Comedy Central roast, which happened a couple of years ago, where and it was just awful. It was awful to watch, but they were both there.
Yeah, he strikes me, weirdly, for someone who's sort of started his career with this, comedy. For people who don't know about Moonlighting, go and look it up on YouTube, because it was really metafictional and weird TV, and really good. I really enjoyed it. But he seems kind of quite humorless now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I had a 5-minute interview with him at a junket, and I'm sorry this has turned into a Bruce Willis podcast. There's a reason why he's on my mind at the moment, but I've been writing a bit about him. But yeah, I met him at a junket for Red 2, the masterpiece that is Red 2.
Oh yeah, I've not seen either of those films.
Yeah,
they're sort of geriatric expendables.
They got amazing casts, but yeah, I had this junket slot for like 5 minutes, and he was wearing a dressing gown. It was like 2 PM, but he had he put on the hotel bathrobe. And I remember the kind of the PR people there operating the junket. Before I went in, they said, "Can you ask him why he's got a bathrobe on?" And I said, I'm not going to, because I think the premiere was a few hours away, and they were quite concerned he was going to turn up to the premiere in a bathrobe. But they said, can you ask him? And I was like, absolutely not. But I went in, and it was painful. And yeah, I asked him, what's your favorite memory of making Die Hard? And his answer was, I can't remember. So that gives you a sense of the banter, the witty back and forth going on.
Monosyllabic. I just read Future Noir, the
Blade Runner
book. And there's an interview with Harrison Ford at the back, which it's kind of hilarious to read as a journalist who has done interviews, because maybe if you're a reader, you're just going, Harrison Ford's answer's a bit short. But as the interview goes on, the questions get longer and longer, and the answers become more and more. I'm just not that interested.
I've had a few of those interviews myself.
Yeah,
including with Harrison Ford.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, he's not a quote machine. He's not like an anecdote dispenser. But fair play. He's Harrison Ford. Yeah, that's okay. I think it's him and De Niro. They're introverts, right? Like I kind of get it. Get it. They probably absolutely. You get the sense that they're like that. Probably with people who aren't interviewers, they probably just don't like speaking to people.
In terms of going back to trying to get away from Bruce Willis for 5 minutes.
Let's get away from Bruce. Let's
What was the name of his album?
The Return of Bruno.
I never understood that either. Because was Bruno like his alter ego, or was he waiting for Bruno? And why did he have a name that was so close to Bruce?
And why was his first album called The Return of Bruno? Like, why not Here's Bruno for the first time? Like, what, like he was anticipating his return.
Oh, look who's here, Bruno.
Bruno's here. Yeah, I haven't got to the bottom of his Bruno persona, but it's that's a thing. That's a thing that he did.
That's his Ziggy, isn't it? At the end of the tour, he said, "This is going to be the last song we ever play as Bruno. I'm going back to Bruce now."
Yeah.
Don't expect me to return again. You've had one return. You're not getting another. Yeah. Sorry.
For a birthday present, one of my friends got me a 12-inch vinyl of Bruce Willis singing Under the Boardwalk that has to be heard to be believed.
How old were you when you got this birthday present?
I would have been in my 20s.
Right.
It wasn't when it came out.
I was going to say, because I thought it was... Because I remember
from a charity shop. It was from a charity shop.
Right, okay. The charity shop birthday gift. What wonderful friends we have.
Most of Bruce Willis's musical output can be found these days.
It's probably quite valuable for its rarity in an unsmashed state. Going back to the 80s and let's get away from Bruce for a few seconds. He'll be back. Him or Bruno will return. One of the other things that is sort of unavoidable about looking at comedy is as cultures change, comedy is one of the immediate victims because it's often on the edge of, pushing what is shocking or it's often dealing with things like sex. And the whole environment since the 1980s, well, since 5-10 years ago, has changed so much with the Me Too movement and everything. I mean, some of these comedies make pretty hard watches for that reason. I mean, even Animal House, which is, as we said earlier, the sort of template and the key to a lot of these, has some really dodgy scenes in it. Is that kind of true of all of these? Is it just something we have to take as part of the landscape of the 1980s? Or are there some which were actually quite, looked ahead a little bit more, have survived and weathered a bit better?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. As you say, a lot of these films, even the PGs, have got stuff which is questionable, whether it's language or whether it's sort of the way that sex scenes are portrayed or the way, the Animal House, I immediately think of the scene where, John Belushi is spying through the window as girls are getting undressed at this sorority house, and there's a comedy erection. Of course, there is. But then I don't think
which pushes him off because he's on a ladder.
Away from the building. I can't remember if there's a sound effect in my mind. There's a sound effect. There probably is. Yeah, I mean the one that gets talked about maybe the most, well, certainly people I know, is the Ghostbusters, the spectral blowjob, as Ivan Reitman puts it, which is the montage of one of the montages in Ghostbusters, a film for kids or a film that is accessible to kids or marketed at kids. Dan Aykroyd's character, that the sheets are pulled back and you see he's clearly getting a blowjob, and then it cuts to like a female ghost hovering above him. So
I remember that scene. Yeah,
that is in Ghostbusters. That made it through.
And he doesn't get slimed though, does he? Because that would be.
There's no slime in that.
The ectoplasm is.
Yeah, there's no ectoplasm. There's a lot of dubious stuff, but not enough. I would say those things wouldn't be sufficient to never watch the film again. I think Revenge of the Nerds is one where I just couldn't watch that film again because there's the scene in it where one of the nerds has sex with this girl and she thinks it's her boyfriend because it's in the dark, and he basically tricks her into having sex. It's just so sort of icky and whatever. But yeah.
Sort of leading on from that question, in terms of the sort of the changing sexual mores and cultural norms and whatnot. And also, by the way, I noticed I watched Gremlins 2 for the first time ever, like a year ago or something, and they smoke in the office. There's it's a kids' film and they're smoking in the workplace. It's just,
the Gremlins do, or the humans do.
No, the people like.
Oh right, I was going to say you can't criticize Gremlins for they're going to smoke every chance they get.
Yeah, no, I mean I'm not that not that much of an idiot today. Well, these Gremlins are real vandals. Are we supposed to like these?
They're terrible role models.
Are they the heroes?
Yeah, the 80s. I mean, the Ghostbusters smoke as well, which you kind of always forget about, and they're just they're all like chain smoking. Like maniacs, but that was the 80s. God bless the 80s.
Actually, I remember the Gremlins, the first film, being quite controversial at the time because there was a bit of concern about it encouraging drink driving.
Again, was it the Gremlin driving the plow? Was he?
Yeah. I remember, well, this is a real flashback, but I remember Jonathan King doing his Entertainment USA show and reporting this story of like there's a sort of the government is worried, and I think I might be making this up, but I think they actually had to sort of do a Gremlins PSA about don't drink and drive. It's not funny, as a way of kind of eliminating any sense of scandal or that they were giving a bad message.
They should just say, don't do anything from the film Gremlins. Nothing in that film should be replicated.
Absolutely. Especially don't feed them after midnight and don't add water.
Yeah, don't buy any unidentified creature from Chinatown. Just don't do any of it.
I love that film. And talking of like books, I read the novelization of both Ghostbusters and Gremlins because those were our video cassettes essentially before video cassettes. I remember the novelization of Ghostbusters is all in the present tense.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It was such a weird read to just be going. I think maybe they just wrote out the treatment or something. But
that's interesting.
I remember it being kind of quite odd as a kid reading it and going, aren't books supposed to be in the past tense?
Was the ghost blowjob in the novelization? Do you remember?
I tell you what, I bet there was, because those novelizations tended to be a little bit risque.
Yeah.
You know?
The Terminator one famously has like a very lurid sex scene, which Chris Hewitt often quotes to me at length. Yeah, it's unpleasant, but he may have written it. But yeah, they do kind of go off on one.
William Kotzwinkle wrote the E.T. novelization, and Kotzwinkle was an actual novelist. He's a renowned novelist, and I think maybe they gave him the job as a friend of the family or something, just as a big money day. And if you read the novelization, it's actually really good, but it's got lots of things about nipples and stuff in it that, as a kid reading, the age group that you would expect to read that sort of thing, wasn't
ready for it.
Yeah, that wasn't necessarily appropriate. But anyway, following on from what we were saying earlier, also it's wild and crazy guys, isn't it? I mean, there don't seem to be many female figures here, although there were some female comedians. It's not. They didn't seem to make it so much into the big time. Why was that? Was that just the usual story, or was it particularly hard for comedians?
Yeah, it's interesting because it just, I would love to have written about some female stars, if nothing else, just kind of make it more interesting. But Gilda Radner, would have been appearing in big budget films, and it just didn't happen, like, for whatever reason. And I'm sure sexism was a major part of it. I think that was it was like a boys' club, really. And so, there were funny women on Saturday Night Live, Lorraine Newman and, Jane Curtin, who kind of appeared in Coneheads later on with Aykroyd, but they didn't really, it was a boys' club thing. The Ghostbusters are four blokes hanging out. Stripes is set in a very male world.
The first one is the recent remake changed that.
Of Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
I think it's got some funny stuff.
I like the remake. I'll go on record. I'll say it's better than Ghostbusters 2.
I don't think that's controversial, but it is with me. Yeah, it's a bit of a shame because it's great that these very funny women get the kind of lead roles, but weirdly, I think Chris Hemsworth is kind of the funniest character in the film. He gets the kind of Rick Moranis role, just coming in and just being insane in every scene. But yeah, it's a shame that it's fine. I just wish it had been funnier. I wish that they had got another film. A lot could have come of that if it had done better. It was a very toxic, group of people reacting to it who took against it because they were women. It's fine. It's like a freestyle comedy. I think it's got some really funny stuff in it.
I really didn't mind it. I just thought it fell apart in the last 30 minutes, and it just became a really, I think big Hollywood comedies, there's a tendency to basically turn them into action movies in the same way a lot of action movies turn into comedies. And I found that final battle kind of as boring as many last acts of action movies where you're going, okay, the premise was good, but you're just blowing stuff up now.
It had a very improv-y kind of feel to it, largely because they were improvising it. And, I got to go on the set and watch them literally doing alts. I don't know. I think the thing about the original Ghostbusters is because Aykroyd was taking it so seriously, it wasn't just gobbledygook. It was like there were, he was researching real mythology, and it felt like there was a genuinely kind of scary drama happening, but they were just doing comedic riffs on it. Whereas I feel like the new one didn't have that same sense of menace, and it didn't have the great villain, and it just felt a bit too kind of like an SNL sketch rather than, a genuine, like an proper epic thing where you were invested in the story. But, it was fine. But yeah, I don't know what, the 80s was not great for women in Hollywood generally. I don't think that, it was very much a kind of a male driven thing. I asked Ivan Reitman about it, and he was saying that was, it was the male driven comedies that do well internationally, and they were the ones that Hollywood were greenlighting, and it was all kind of driven by money. But, Gilda Radner, I wish she had been given some vehicles. She had so much charisma and was so great on the small screen, and it's just a real shame that she wasn't given the same opportunities that these guys were.
I mean, my unsung sort of heroine of those years is Madeline Kahn. I think every moment she's on the screen, she's the funniest thing in whatever she's in.
Yeah, she's great.
I recently watched Clue, and just her line reading. The line is something like, "You hated her. You killed her. You hated her." And she says, "I hated her so much." And it's just, I can't do it, but it's the best. Flames at the side of my face. and her in Young Frankenstein as well.
She's amazing in Young Frankenstein.
Blows me away. What about, I mean, there are some, obviously you keep your focus on the SNL guys and the
SCTV guys.
Yeah, exactly. And that core of those two great TV shows. But there was sort of some films that sort of sneaked out there that you couldn't cover, I guess. I mean, I think for me, I think you mention it a bit in passing, but like Spinal Tap is one of the biggest comedies. I mean, it doesn't really fit anywhere, does it? It's a bit of a what's that word? Sui generis? One of a kind, I guess. I should stop trying to speak Latin.
I think we should speak more Latin. I'll try and slip. I did Latin at school, so I'll try to get some. But Spinal Tap is one of my favorite films. It is genius. From every frame of that film is hilarious. I would love to write about it. I could write a book about Derek Smalls and the contents of his trousers. It's so full of. Again, it's like with the Steve Martin thing, where you've got every type of comedy there. You've got funny wordplay. You've got brilliant physical comedy. With the people getting trapped in pods and going through X-ray machines. It's you got raunchy comedy. You've got just silly sight gags. You like every single type of comedy is stuffed into that film. That is definitely one of the best comedies of the 80s, if not ever.
I've got the title for your book. Your book should be called "Our Bassist Wrote This."
There we go. Let's greenlight this. Let's get this happening. But that is an absolutely brilliant comedy. But yeah, you're right. Like Christopher Guest didn't really come through in the same way. Like he didn't become a big A-lister. They weren't kind of greenlighting movies. I guess that's what these 8 people I was tracking kind of had in common, is that they were all having movies, greenlit based on them starring in it. Even Rick Moranis, it just seems insane that, I mean, he's a brilliant comedian and the nicest guy in the world, but the fact that he became an A-lister is just kind of brilliant and wouldn't happen these days, I don't think.
Yeah, I would struggle to think of someone who was.
I guess Steve Carell is maybe in the kind of the Rick Moranis mold of someone who's a little bit sort of geeky looking and not your dashing A-lister guy, but became a huge comedy star. I don't know. Yeah, just the fact that he was so huge, as big as he became, is amazing. So Christopher Guest kind of did his own thing, and he obviously created his own kind of genre of comedy and has done brilliant film after brilliant film. But yeah, didn't quite fit into the mold.
What film book would you recommend to someone who perhaps maybe hasn't read a film book before, or just a fan of film books, and this is one to go for?
Yeah, it's a hard question because my bookshelves are like 90% film books. I just can't get enough of reading them, and there are so many I could point out. Obviously, Easy Riders, Raging Bulls was like a massive influence on my book, and I had a copy of that close by, and that kind of inspired me to do the kind of jumping from one character to another
and
kind of
Peter
thing.
Biskind gave you quite a nice review as well.
Yeah, that was one of the most amazing things that came out of this. I would never have believed that Peter Biskind would read my book. Easy Riders Raging Bull is a book that I loved for as long as I can remember and read many, many times. And so the day I got an email from my editor in New York, like saying Peter Biskin's read your book and is giving a blurb for it, I was kind of amazed and very excited about. So I'm not going to pick that because it's too obvious, because I think everyone knows about that who's interested in film. There's a book called The Men Who Would Be King by Nicole Laporte, which is about DreamWorks. I think the full title is Movies, Moguls, and a Company Called DreamWorks. And I'm not 100% sure you can get it in the UK. I thought I remembered reading that for legal reasons they're not able to publish it here, and so you kind of have to get it ordered from America. I can't remember if that's 100% true, but it's a really cracking read. It's I think quite similar to mine in terms of it's sort of a combination of looking at the kind of the business side of it, but then also full of anecdotes and trying to kind of see people as people and get a sense of their personalities. And so it's got Spielberg. It follows films like Gladiator and Shrek and all these DreamWorks things with the backdrop of telling the story of DreamWorks and all the kind of the big egos involved and the corporate struggles and all that. And it's just really entertaining. I remember reading that on holiday probably 10 years ago and just loving it. And it was like I had to read it in think it was like a day and a half. Almost a day. Like I just couldn't put it down.
Ripped through it.
So I think I'm gonna recommend that. Yeah, I'm gonna just recommend that because I don't think enough people have heard of it. And it's I don't think she's written another book since, but it's great. She was like a variety writer who did this one book, and it's well worth checking out. Nicole Laporte. It's got loads of good stories. It was a little bit controversial when it came out because I think there were sort of heated responses from some of the people she was writing about to some of the stories. I remember I went to the Robin Hood junket and I asked Russell Crowe about it because the book had just come out and I just read it. And there's a whole bit on Gladiator. He doesn't come out of it very well. And I asked him about it, and he didn't.
He had an argument with a guy from Mark Lawson.
Sure. And it was about his accent. Somebody asked him, what were you going for with your accent or something like that? And
sounded a bit Irish.
I don't know if it's a great idea to ask Russell Crowe, what were you trying for with this or that? But yeah, I remember that would have been the same day. So maybe he just wasn't happy, full stop, but he definitely wasn't happy about the book. And there's a book called The Studio, which is an older one. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's by a guy called John Gregory Dunn. And he basically, 20th Century Fox unwisely allowed him to hang out inside the studio, access all areas for a year. So he spent the whole of 1967 wandering around inside Fox and sitting in on every meeting. Like he literally was allowed to go anywhere he wanted, and wrote this book called The Studio, where he's writing about films like Planet of the Apes and Dr. Dolittle and various other things. And it's an amazing insight into just how chaotic and mad, harking back to what we were talking about earlier, where no one knows what's going to be big, and there's just these big budget films are just driven by fear, and he's sitting in on meetings where people are just panicking, and it's great. It gives you a really, really good insidery sense, and probably hasn't been repeated since, because I think the studios just went, why the fuck did we do that? Don't let him in again. But it's great. That's The Studio.
John Gregory Dunn is Joan Didion's husband.
Is he? Okay.
Yeah, and they were actually a screenwriting couple. They wrote quite a few screenplays, including Panic in Needle Park, one of the sort of lesser known early Al Pacino movies, which is absolutely brilliant. It's superb. I think they wrote.
I saw that a few years ago. Does Al Pacino not throw a dog into a river in that?
I don't remember that scene, but it's possible. I mean, it's fairly gritty stuff. And I think they also did that one with Robert Redford and Michelle Pfeiffer, quite later, like in the 90s, one of his later romantic films but they did a fair share of sort of quite successful screenplays. They wrote A Star is Born, the Chris Christopherson version. And also his nephew is Griffin Dunn from
from After Hours.
Yeah, After Hours and American Werewolf in London.
Good trivia. Your John Gregory Dunn trivia game is strong.
Nick, it's been an absolute joy. It's been really good fun.
But yeah, no, thanks for having me on. It's been fun. It's been good to largely talk about Bruce Willis, but occasional detours into other topics.
Absolutely, and I hope everyone will go out and buy your book if they haven't already, because it's brilliant. It's a really good history of the 1980s comedy boom. Okay, so just to finish off with some more trivia. Top Cat was renamed Boss Cat when it was released in the UK because of a clash with a identically named popular cat food. The Gremlins did release a drink driving awareness campaign, and the books which Nick recommended were The Men Who Would Be King, an almost epic tale of moguls, movies and a company called DreamWorks by Nicole Laporte, and The Studio by John Griffin Dunn. So that's all from us today. Thank you very much for listening, and please remember to subscribe and like and spread the word. Till the next time, take care.
I'm outlining a new writing project, and 5 months of peace is just what I want.
1-800-Flowers.com knows that a gift is never just a gift. A gift is an expression of everything you feel and helps build more meaningful relationships. 1-800-Flowers takes the pressure off by helping you navigate life's important moments by making it simple to find the perfect gift. From flowers and cookies to cake and chocolate, 1-800-Flowers helps guide you in finding the right gift to say how you feel. To learn more, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.